In King's Field, there is a king who turns into a tree. King is a jerk. It doesn't have to do with them turning into a tree. They were already a jerk, but becoming a tree does not make them any better. Why, hello there, and welcome to episode 4 of The Hunt, a series where I look at the Souls games and talk about various topics with sort of a different spin each time. And for this episode, I've been thinking about trees a lot lately, and I wanted to look at the various ways that Fromsoftware uses trees in their games. And I wanted to use that as a springboard to look at the Erd tree for Elden Ring, as well as other mythological trees, just to get a sense of what we might expect and if there's anything we can glean by looking at Fromsoftware's previous output and usage of trees, and also just what George R. R. Martin and Fromsoftware might be pulling from mythologically for world trees and other important trees in various myths around the world. So first, let's get into it and talk about different trees and what they have been like in Fromsoftware titles. In King's Field, there is a king who turns into a tree. King is a jerk. It doesn't have to do with them turning into a tree. They were already a jerk, but becoming a tree does not make them any better. There are also trees called the dragon grasses, and these trees existed before everything and sort of know the truth of the world. One of the two big bad dragons in the King's Field series is the dragon Gyra, the black dragon of the forest. In Shadow Tower Abyss, the Shadow Tower is a sentient upside down tree from space that is sort of this mysterious eldritch being. As a side note, in Armored Core Verdict Day, there are these mysterious towers, and they also look really tree-like, and they seem to serve a similar role as these mysterious eldritch entities. And then getting into Kuon, which is a Fromsoftware horror game, the Mulberry Twins are trees, and they basically cause all the events of Kuon to happen. And now getting into the Souls games. In Demon Souls, of course, we have the Old One, who is a massive tree-like creature. And then in Dark Souls, we have the Arch Trees, which, they are sort of the Yggdrasil world tree symbolism. They're part of the foundation of the world. They existed before and after disparity. And looking at Ash Lake, where you see all those arch trees, there's imagery inspired by Nausicaa, the valley there, which there's trees, then they're foundational to the world in that movie as well, and they're purifying poisonous water, and that Ash Lake imagery is directly inspired by that film. You also have the Bed of Chaos, which is a tree from the Witch of Izalith, and that's sort of the act of creation gone wild, spewing out corrupt forms of life. And then you have the giants in Dark Souls 2 who turn into trees when they die, and that's sort of the seed of the Tree of Giants, sort of indicates that that's sort of supposed to be about rebirth and the cycle of life and death and regeneration. And in Dark Souls 3, the Cursed Rotted Greatwood is a spirit tree that was rotted by an overwhelming amount of curses that were put into it, and you're sort of fighting the curses that have rotted the spirit tree. And then in Lothric, you see hollows turning into trees, reaching out towards Lothric Castle. In Sekiro, there is the Divine Dragon, also called the Sakura Dragon, and that dragon is a Sakura tree. So, sort of my takeaway from how Fromsoftware has used trees in their titles, there's different nuances and details in each of the titles, but I do think there's some through lines. They're often foundational to the world, predating the gods and existing beyond the cycle of creation. And the other way, the major way, is when they're not like a mythological tree, when someone's transforming into a tree, that transformation into a tree is symbolic of rebirth, but not necessarily transcendence, but more of a continuation of the cycle of life and death. And I would be remiss if in this conversation about trees, I did not mention that there's often this theme of water that coincides with trees. As Theomony, who is a guest on the show and a choice follow on YouTube and Twitter, she mentioned to me how there's characters like the Old One in Demon Souls and Shadow Tower. They have this unquenching thirst for life, but in this like amoral cosmic horror kind of way. Where in Demon Souls, the souls are sort of represented by water, and the Old One wants to drink up all these souls, but not in a malevolent way, he's just hungry. Trees and tree imagery in From games are often a barometer of the state of the world. And given From's worlds, that usually means that there's also themes of rot, or the trees being unwell in some way. So now we come to the Erd tree of Elden Ring, which might be the most central Fromsoftware tree to date. But before diving into how Fromsoft's history of tree imagery might help us glean some information about the Erd tree, we need to talk about the George R. R. Martin factor. George R. R. Martin made the mythology in collaboration with From, and likely developed the concept and name for the Erd tree. Being that this is a collaboration, I want to briefly take a look at George R. R. Martin's use of tree imagery in his works, and also look at some mythological trees that likely have inspired both George R. R. Martin and Fromsoftware as sort of a basis for what might be a good common ground in this collaboration. So for George R. R. Martin, we have the Weirwood Trees in A Song of Ice and Fire, and those are sacred trees to the followers of the old gods and the ancient people, the children of the forest, and they worshipped the Weirwoods as gods. And they would carve faces into the heart trees, and they would hold ceremonies in front of the heart trees because followers of the old gods and the children believed that the gods could see them and that they couldn't lie in front of these trees. So it was a good place to hold oaths and ceremonies. And just from this information, I'm already getting some Celtic and Norse inspirations behind the Weirwood trees and sort of the customs surrounding them. So let's take a look at some mythological trees that likely inspired George R. R. Martin and From for Elden Ring. First, I want to take a look at the Celtic Tree of Life, and it represents balance, harmony, and rebirth. The way it's represented is that it has the Celtic knots around the tree, and that you could flip it either way, and it would read the same, so it is symmetrical vertically. And Celtic settlements would often they would clear out some forest, and they would leave a tree in the middle to sort of honor the tree of life. And they would hold important meetings at this tree because they believed that you could speak to the gods through the tree, which unite the branches. The branches reach up to the heavens and the roots reach into the ground and make this connection through the trunk, and that they would hold meetings there. And that reminds me of the Weirwoods from George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. And the other thing to mention is that sort of with these Celtic settlements in this tree, sort of the ultimate diss was to cut down your enemy's tree, because that was sort of like cutting off the spiritual connection in the town. Hello, Sean from the editing side of things here. I learned something about Celtic mythology after recording, and I just wanted to add it here because I think it has some relevance to the discussion at hand. But in the creation myth of Celtic mythology, at least this version, Celtic mythology, sort of like Norse mythology, was an oral tradition and passed along. So this isn't like the one and only version, and I think it's pieced together. But in this creation story, where the land meets the sea, there was this mare named Aosha, which I think I'm kind of pronouncing right, and she gave birth to Cernunnos, who is this Celtic god, and from there, more gods were created. But the interesting part is that eventually they wanted to create people to like worship them and stuff. And so they created humans and animals from the bark of an oak tree. And I just wanted to add that in there because we're talking about mythological trees and Celtic mythology. So there you have it. Now you can get back to the past version of me who is not going to bring this up again, but you and I know, which is pretty cool. Next, we have Yggdrasil, which you are probably familiar with. And Yggdrasil connects the 9 realms together. And the roots and branches are all important. The gods, they would meet and hold their functions around Yggdrasil. And also, I wanted to mention, in addition to the 9 realms and the roots, there's various rivers and stuff. There's even some animals. There's 4 stags that eat the leaves off of Yggdrasil. There's the serpent Nidhogg, who gnaws on the root, one of the roots of Yggdrasil. And then there's this like annoying squirrel, sends messages and talks smack between the deer and the dragon. And next we have the World Spiral Tree from Berserk, which is more of a connection for From, but I still wanted to bring it up because anything Berserk is likely to be an inspiration for From, at least visually. And the World Spiral Tree, there was the Great Roar of the astral world in Berserk, and it united the physical plane and the astral plane together. And the World Spiral Tree grows out of the corpse of this like eldritch abomination, and it connects the planes together. Next, we have Telperion and Laurelin, which are the 2 sacred trees of Valinor from Tolkien mythology. Laurelin is the gold tree, which sort of represents the sun, and Telperion is the silver tree, which sort of represents the moon and nighttime. And these trees reside in Valinor, which is the home of the gods in the Middle-earth Tolkien mythology. And the trees are destroyed, and the Silmarils, which are these 3 jewels, are infused with their essence, and there is a war that is fought over having control of the Silmarils. So looking at some similarities between mythological trees is that, they act as a connection between the planes or realms or the worlds, especially between, the realm of the gods and man, and that the trees, like in Fromsoftware's games, also reflect the health of the people and earth around them, and that they often represent balance and harmony in the cycle of rebirth and life and death. So now getting back to Elden Ring and the Erd Tree. What we know about the Erd Tree is that it is a manifestation of the Elden Ring, which is the source of power in the lands between. The Elden Ring has been shattered, but the Erd Tree remains. Erd means earth in German, and I would guess that this was named by George R. R. Martin because he developed the mythology, and I couldn't help but wonder if the use of a German word in there was at all a nod toward Norse inspiration for the Erd Tree. Because I couldn't help but notice that in the gameplay trailer, we see the 4-winged dragon and we see the stag, which reminded me of Nidhogg and the 4 stags that hang out around Yggdrasil. But it also seems that the Erd Tree is the central feature of the lands between. And I was wondering if perhaps, they would, similarly to the Celtic Tree of Life, hold, ceremonies around. Perhaps that is what those bridges that go towards the Erd Tree are, to give access to hold ceremonies. I'm not sure. And like the Weirwood Trees and the Celtic Tree of Life, the Erd Tree seems to clearly provide this connection between the earth and the heavens, and sort of as a conduit between God. In this case, in Elden Ring, the greater will, which is this mysterious force, and the people of the lands between. The Elden Ring, the source of the Erd Tree, has been shattered into the great ruins. And this essence being stolen as objects of power reminds me of the Trees of Valinor and the war over the Silmarils and being in control of these objects that represent these trees of power. And I wonder if there is any inspiration that comes from that. The Erd Tree is also located in this mythical Lands Between, which is home to Marika the Eternal and her demigod children and these blessed people with this golden aura. And this reminds me also of the Trees of Valinor because they're located in this, sacred city of Valinor, and also Yggdrasil because that's where the gods would hold their meetings, was around that tree. So it's in this sort of hallowed area. And it seems like the Erd Tree is continuing the tradition of most mythological trees and acting as a barometer of the world and how things are going. And after the shattering of the Elden Ring, it seems like the Erd Tree could be dying or fading. The tree in the gameplay trailer is translucent, and the golden leaves are falling. Also, this violent upheaval may be messing with the reality of the world itself, in the cycle of life and death, growth and decay, and that is something that mythological trees usually represent, and it might be broken. From the gameplay trailer and Bamco's story summary, we know that there is undeath in the world, with the Tarnished, and many of the enemies seem to be proof of this as they appear corpse-like, like zombies, and a lot of them have very corpse eyes, very dead eyes. And in this sense, could the shattering be akin to the roar of the astral plane from Berserk, in which, you have these natural things and spirits passing on? Could the shattering be blending together the world of the living and the world of these spirits and causing things that shouldn't be happening to happen and come back to life and have other sort of weird things happen because the cycle of life and death, growth and decay is broken? And lastly, I would be remiss not to mention the tree-like giants who have perhaps transformed into these tree beings, and maybe it's even against their will, especially because they seem to be under servitude as these giant tree-like creatures. And it seems in line with From's penchant for transforming into trees, but not having that be like some transcendent event, but being this, just other form of life and, just perpetuating this cycle of rebirth, but not necessarily as a good thing. So there you have it. Fromsoftware, a quick overview of trees and tree imagery in their games, talking about mythological trees, which are probably inspiration for a lot of what From has done in the past, and then taking a look at George R. R. Martin and Fromsoftware and how the Erd Tree, which may be the most important central tree in any of their games yet, and what we might be able to glean just looking at mythological trees and all that. And, I think we've seen some interesting things already, and a lot of it may not pan out. I don't typically do this with the hunt, but I sort of snuck it in because I also talked about Fromsoftware, because it's just interesting to see how these symbols and these themes are used. And it'll be interesting to see the ways in which the Erd Tree does follow in these footsteps, and the ways in which it is also novel and unique, while also, being a part of this tradition. So we will see in January how it ultimately plays out. But this has been The Hunt, episode 4. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave some comments with your opinions. Especially if you know anything else about George R. R. Martin and his use of tree imagery, I would be interested to hear that. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you for the next hunt.